It was an absolutely shocking turn of events. What happened on the recruiting trail today? Going to talk about that and what it means for the Oklahoma Sooners moving forward on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. You can read my work covering the Oklahoma Sooners over at thesoonerswire.com. Also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners and on Facebook, Locked On Sooners Podcast. And hey, we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on YouTube as well. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline for all the best odds, lines, and scores. Got more props than ever before. Check out BetOnline. It's where the game starts. All right, getting into this. What the heck happened? It seemed like for months and months, the Oklahoma Sooners were the trending favorite for David Hicks. Going into his commitment day, it seemed like everything was all buttoned up and David Hicks was going to be committing to the Oklahoma Sooners. And then it turns out the Texas A&M Aggies made one final push, and that was enough for the five-star defensive lineman out of Katy, Texas, to turn his attention to College Station and the Aggies. Completely shocker. You follow the guys that we follow on social media or just in the recruiting world, and everybody was surprised by this. Our guy, Parker Thune, his colleague, Brandon Drum, the guys over at Sooner Scoop, everybody just taken aback and caught off guard by this last minute commitment. It's just the new world order of recruiting. I mean, these guys can change their mind half a dozen times as offers and renegotiations and new things come to the table. It's just surprising / disappointing. And another element of what still has to change for the Oklahoma Sooners on the recruiting front. Brent Venables and his staff have done a very nice job over the last 9 months at trying to transform the image and the identity of the Oklahoma Sooners on the recruiting trail. They did a really great job in the 2 months that they had to close out the 2022 class, got several important flips. Grayson Halton, a 4-star defensive lineman out of, I can't remember where he's from, but he was originally committed to Oregon. Then they got R. Mason Thomas, originally committed to Iowa State, and Kevontae Henry, who was originally committed to Michigan. Those two guys were 3-star players, but we've already seen what R. Mason Thomas can do on the football field just in the early going in his Oklahoma Sooners tenure. Very explosive pressure player, has a chance to be a really, really good player for the Oklahoma Sooners down the road. And yet, despite all of the good things that's happened, the Oklahoma Sooners haven't been able to close on these interior defensive line prospects. Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, Jordan Raynaud, most recently Alabama, and then now David Hicks to Texas A&M. It's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow. Brent Venables, Todd Bates, they've got a great track record. They've got the coaching acumen. They've got the guys in the NFL over the last 20 years that you can point to and say, look at what we've been able to help produce, taking high-level talent and getting them to the next level, getting them to play really good football at Oklahoma so that they can get to the next level. We talked about it on yesterday's show. Tommy Harris, Gerald McCoy, Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, just a few of the guys that played interior defensive line for both Oklahoma and Clemson that have had really productive careers at the NFL level now. They were All-American players in their time at college. And so there's a bit of a disconnect happening between what Brent Venables and Todd Bates are able to do and the fact that they haven't been able to close on some high-quality interior defensive line prospects in Raynaud, Brownlow-Dindy. Brownlow-Dindy was part of the 2022 class, and now David Hicks. There's still a transition that's taking place at Oklahoma. There's still something that is growing. This is by no means the finished product for the Oklahoma Sooners as Brent Venables continues to establish a culture and an identity on the defensive side of the football. And yet, to be the trending favorite for so long in this recruitment battle. A&M was always there. It was a neck and neck battle for a long time. But I mean, you had guys like Steve Wiltfong, National Recruiting Director for 247 Sports, projecting the Oklahoma Sooners to get this commitment. And then at the last minute, he flips his crystal ball projection to Texas A&M, either at the last minute or just after David Hicks commits, depending on perspective there. But when you have a guy like Parker, who's been highly accurate on his crystal ball projections for the 2023 class, I think something like 96% accurate on his crystal ball projections. When a commitment like David Hicks doesn't go the Oklahoma Sooners' way, it's going to be a surprise to everybody. It takes everybody off guard. And from reports from Kerry Murdoch of Soonerscoop.com, the Oklahoma Sooners only found out 10 minutes before his commitment that he was going to A&M, that he was committing to A&M. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. And it's a shame because all we hear about and all we've heard from these, this prospect in particular is what the relationships meant at the University of Oklahoma. Now, he's very fond of all the people in College Station, talks glowingly of the relationships he has with the coaches there, people who have been recruiting him for quite some time now. That's fine. I get that. At the same time, like, where's the relationship when you're waiting till just before and then you contact Todd Bates and you let him know, hey, I'm going to A&M. Like, you don't give him the opportunity to have a discussion, have a conversation with you. It's like breaking up with somebody over a text message. It's just, hey, we're done. No conversation needed. Nothing's going to happen here. Now, Todd Bates, knowing who he is, the kind of guy that he seems to be, and the kind of guy that everybody talks glowingly about, I'm sure he took it in stride, probably tried to make one last minute pitch, but ultimately was, wish the guy luck and went on his way. But you'd think that after so long in these relationships, and maybe, kudos to David Hicks, I'll say, for giving him the courtesy of making the phone call, because he didn't have to do that either. So I'll give him credit for that. It's not necessary to call Oklahoma. He could, Oklahoma could have found out just like everybody else did, but he did make the phone call. But you'd think that relationship would matter so much that whatever Texas A&M brought to the table to sway David Hicks to College Station would have had a part of a discussion with Todd Bates, Brent Venables, and the Oklahoma coaching staff. But that's neither here nor there. I'm not going to criticize a high school kid for making a decision that he feels and his family feels is in the best interest of his future. That's his choice to make. 100% it is. It's disappointing and it's frustrating that Oklahoma wasn't able to close out on this commitment, especially on the heels of the Kansas State loss. It's a bit of a disappointment. In the last 5 days, you had a loss that was frustrating to Kansas State, a 41-34 game that never really felt like it was that close. And then the surprise loss of David Hicks to the Texas A&M Aggies, a team that you'll see probably in the 2024-2025 season. If I'm guessing how the schedule lines out, it would not surprise me to see Hicks lining up across from the Oklahoma Sooners offensive line. Great player, and he's got all the tools to be a great player at the college level. And best of luck to you. Unless you're playing the Oklahoma Sooners, then hope you get blocked in all of your situations. But we'll talk next about what Oklahoma still has to look forward to, where they go from here, and we'll turn our attention a little bit to TCU as well. But first, let me talk to you about BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and the easiest place to bet on all your sports and get the best player development and team matchup news around. Oklahoma's coming into this game right now as a -6.5 favorite over at BetOnline, and you can get in on the action there, whether it's NFL, college, Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NHL seasons are just around the corner. Go to BetOnline. It's where the game starts. Okay, so the Oklahoma Sooners still in a really good place. I mean, they have the number 6 ranked recruiting class for the 2023 cycle and a group of defensive linemen, 3 guys in defensive end, Adepoju Adebare, 5-star player, defensive end Colton Vasek, 4-star player, and defensive lineman. He could probably play both interior and on the edge. One of those 260, 270 pound guys that's could probably be a 3 technique for you. And Derek LeBlanc, another 4-star guy. So you're sitting really good. Like your defensive line prospects that are coming in the 2023 class, they're really good players and you're ecstatic to have them. It still hurts though to lose David Hicks, but you like where you're headed on the defensive side of the football in the 2023 class. I mean, this team has, again, the number 6 ranked recruiting class. They've got 2 5-stars in this class, and they are, sorry, I'm trying to pull up these ranks right now, but they still have a chance to flip some commitments from several guys. They've got one more commitment or one more prospect that they're really targeting heavily, Malachi Coleman, the wide receiver tight end combo out of Nebraska that is looking to choose between Nebraska and the Oklahoma Sooners. You're able to land that commitment. It'll help boost your offensive profile, which you're already going to have a pretty good one with Jackson Arnold and Caleb Hicks and Jaquays Petaway and Anthony Evans. Sorry, not Jaquays Petaway. Yeah, Jaquays Petaway, Anthony Evans. The offense is already looking really good. So now it's just the defensive side. We got to see, like, can they find another defensive line prospect that they can target and potentially flip, or, somebody that they haven't really been after yet that they want to bring into the fold. I mean, they need another kind of stout dude on the interior, kind of one of those guys that can bulk up to be a 300, 310, 320 pound defensive lineman, because they don't really have that guy right now. They don't have the dude that, aside from a Jeffrey Johnson, who will be graduating at some point, you don't have the guy that can just be a load in the middle and take on blocks and not let offensive linemen get to the second level. And David Hicks, in addition to his athleticism and his size, his strength was incredible. You could rely on him to kind of take some double teams and kind of free up some room for the rest of your defensive line. And he could still potentially win, even though he's being double teamed. That's how good of a player this guy is. We'll see how it translates when he gets to the college level. But for Brent Venables, for the Oklahoma Sooners, they still have a couple prospects and Ryan Yates, Peyton Bowen, that have continued to consider Oklahoma as a possible destination, even though they're committed to Notre Dame and LSU respectively. The door is kind of cracked open a little bit for Oklahoma. And if they were able to add those 2 guys, that could kind of change the perception of this recruiting class a little bit. Even though they did lose David Hicks, they could still end up with the top 5 recruiting class. Still where they're at, it's a good spot. I don't think we're too concerned about Oklahoma on the recruiting front. Brent Venables and his staff have shown that they're really, really good recruiters. They proved it in the 2022 cycle. They've done so over the last few months during the summer in the 2023 cycle. Now it's about recovering and figuring out, okay, what do we do next? And I think what happens probably is between now and National Signing Day is they do find a player that wants to flip. I mean, we're going to have a whole coaching carousel at some point this season. I mean, we've already seen Nebraska lose its head coach. We've already seen Arizona State lose their head coach. If things keep going the way they're going for Texas, there's no telling what could happen there with Steve Sarkisian. So there are potential openings that could create players that are committed right now to certain schools that decide they want to take a look elsewhere. There's also the transfer portal that could open doors for Oklahoma to add some interior defensive line talent as well. So that's kind of where it's at. It's unfortunate. It's disappointing. It's a bummer. Like, I was fully prepared to come on tonight and talk about David Hicks, and Josh and I were going to break down what it meant for the Oklahoma Sooners to get a talent like David Hicks into the fold. But here we are. We're kind of singing a sad song a little bit. And again, best of luck to David Hicks, and except for when they play the Sooners. One question that still lingers in my mind is, like, how are they going to play all that defensive line talent at one time? You can only play so many defensive linemen. I mean, you could decide to go with a bare front and go 5-1 or a 5-2-3 or something like that if you want to, but that kind of exposes you a little bit to the passing game. So it'll be interesting to see how Jimbo Fisher manages to find enough snaps for those guys here in the next couple of years. But it's a talented group of defensive linemen that he's acquired. for the Texas A&M Aggies, and David Hicks is one of those. As we begin to look at Texas Christian University, the Horned Frogs, I feel weird about this game. I don't think that we're going to see the Oklahoma team that we saw last week against Kansas State. But I do think that TCU is a good enough offense to give Oklahoma fits in a different way than Kansas State did. I think, Brent Venables talked about how they have some of the better skill talent that they've seen this season. And I think that's true with, Quentin Johnston, Kendre Miller at running back, and a team that will spread the ball around quite a bit. We're going to have Steven Simcox of Locked On Horned Frogs on for a later episode that'll drop tomorrow morning, that kind of share some of his thoughts, his insights on what's going on with TCU and their hot start to the season, 3-0, beating Colorado and SMU. They beat SMU on the road in a 42-34 win this past weekend. So pretty good offense. SMU might not be the best defensive in the world, but TCU was able to put up 42 points. You don't do that by accident, even against average or potentially bad defenses. So it'll be interesting to see how Oklahoma decides to match up against Quentin Johnston, because he's not been super productive this season. But we also saw with Adrian Martinez coming into last week's game, he hadn't really been super productive this season. And then he had this huge breakout game. We're not going to sleep on Quentin Johnston. I've already seen enough of him to know he is capable of taking over a football game if you are not careful. And I don't think the Oklahoma Sooners will sleep on him either because of what he did last year to the Sooners in Norman. Even though it was a big win for the Sooners, Quentin Johnston still went off, had a great game. But right now, Max Duggan, he's one of the most efficient passers in the country, has a 77% completion percentage. You take away the drops and the throwaway, he's completing 87.9% of his passes. That's an incredible number. He hasn't turned the ball over either. Like Dylan Gabriel, they've been really careful with the football, but he's been able to lead TCU on some long scoring drives and help get them a lot of points to make up for a defense that is kind of giving up a lot of points. The defense that's not been really tested except for against Tanner Mordecai and the SMU Mustangs. And so it'll be really interesting to see. I just kind of on the surface, I look at this one. I think it's going to be a fairly high scoring game. I think both teams could reach the 30s, even though Oklahoma's defense could bounce back this week and have a really good game. I'm kind of in prove it mode again. I want to see them prove it before I'm ready to say, okay, yeah, they're going to be able to hold teams consistently to 25 or less. Based on what I saw out of the Kansas State game, that's where I'm at. I'm in prove it mode. I do think that Oklahoma is the better team in this one. I do think they have the better depth and the better talent. I would like to see Oklahoma, especially on defense, kind of roll into that depth a little bit more. I think they played too many guys, too many snaps. You look at the snap counts, and 4-year guys played every single snap, and Kansas State ran 85 snaps, 85 plays in that game. That's too many. That's too many snaps for your defensive players to play. You got to be able to go into the well and get into the depth chart to be able to find something, find an extra burst of energy. I would like to see them go back to playing a guy like Jaron Kanik or Mason Thomas, giving them some snaps on the field after having some productive moments earlier in the season. It's going to be interesting to see how Oklahoma attacks this one. I think they come out sharper on both sides of the football, but I do still think that TCU is going to be able to do enough offensively to cause Oklahoma's defense fits, and we'll put some points on the board. So we'll continue to break down the game. We'll get you ready for Oklahoma and TCU on our Thursday night, Friday morning episode when Josh will be back with me to break that down. But I think it's going to be good for Oklahoma to get on the football field, for the players and the coaches and for the fans. I'm eager to get back on the football field, watching a football game and not concerned about the Kansas State loss anymore. That's done. It's in the rear view. You only got, all you can do is just get better, and then put the David Hicks commitment to Texas A&M in the rear view as well, because those two things, kind of a bummer of a week for Oklahoma, but it can all be set right, and all can be right with the world with a strong performance against the TCU Horned Frogs on Saturday. That game will take place at 11 a.m. in Fort Worth and on ABC. So get ready for that. It's going to be a great week of Big 12 games as well. And Josh and I will pick those games on our next episode. Or the Friday episode to get you ready for a fun weekend of college football. Every weekend in the fall is a fun weekend because we get college football. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Again, we're free and available on all platforms. Go subscribe to the show over on YouTube as well. And we'll be back to discuss and break down more of TCU later in the week. Again, be on the lookout for my interview or the episode with Steven Simcox of Locked On Horned Frogs, where we kind of give you a little bit of both perspectives on what the big storylines are heading into this game, matchups that we're looking forward to watching, and what we think the keys to a Oklahoma and a TCU win might be. So great show there. Again, follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners and on Facebook, Locked On Sooners Podcast. And again, subscribe to the show over on YouTube. But until next time, for my colleague Josh Helmer, who's off helping his girlfriend celebrate a birthday, happy birthday to you. I'm John Williams. We'll catch you then. Boomer Sooner.